And then came the holiday season, and I was actually hiking in the Big South Fork National River and Recreation Area, which is one of our national park units on the border of Kentucky and Tennessee. And after a day of recreation, I visited, there's a little historic town there, right on the edge of the park. And it was supposed to be this little Victorian utopia. We go on a tour of the buildings, and there's one manor that they rent out rooms for visitors. So just without planning ahead of time, spur of the moment, I said, I'm going to stay here tonight in this old Victorian manor. So I got a room, and you're supposed to, you expect to share the building with other people, but I was the only one renting a room. So I had this big Victorian manor to myself. So there at night, I was sitting in the parlor on all this antique furniture from the Victorian era, and I felt like I was in a museum, like I was in one of our national park units, so a famous president's house or someone important to our nation, where don't touch anything, no flash photography, but here I can touch everything, I can take as many pictures as I want. So I was sitting there with the fire going, there was a bookshelf of old vintage books, and I went over and I found a copy of Charles Dickens' Christmas stories. I think the Seven Poor Travelers was one of them. And so I began reading this really old copy, and pages are really brutal. And then it just came to my mind. I was thinking, I wonder if Roosevelt read this during the holiday. And then sitting in this old parlor, I was like, I wonder what the Roosevelt home looked like and how it was decorated for Christmas. And then my mind just went out of control, asking all these questions about Roosevelt and the holidays. And I realized there's no real book out there that had this information. So I concluded, you know what? This is going to be a book I'm going to write. Not my first book. I've written some books about my adventures in the national park, but I thought there needed to be a book titled Theodore Roosevelt for the Holidays that explores this topic. So I delved into the archives of Library of Congress online and the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson State University, as well as old resources from the National Park Service. And I began finding a lot of letters and diary entries written by Roosevelt throughout the course of his life related to the holidays. And these letters, some of them very entertaining to read, that I concluded I don't need to, write this book and just, pull bits and pieces from these resources. I need to present these Roosevelt documents the way they are because they're so entertaining to read just the way they are. So in my book here, there are 5 sections in the book. There's one that has his Thanksgiving proclamations. The next section are the letters that he wrote to friends and family during the holiday seasons, including the one that he wrote to Thomas Edison. There's his diary entries spanning from when he was 11 years old all the way to a week before his death. And there's a section of excerpts from biographies, including his own, and sections that pertain to the holidays. And lastly, there are some pieces of literature that you find in his actual personal library at Sagamore Hill that are related to Christmas and winter. And each piece I introduce, I put it in context. So you kind of take a journey through Roosevelt's life as you read these diary entries and letters. But what I want to do now is sort of jump right in to the holidays with Roosevelt. So I'm going to paint a picture with words. I'm going to do a harmony of a lot of these resources together to show you what a typical Christmas morning may have been like for the Roosevelts at the prime of his fatherhood when he was at Sagamore Hill with all his young children. And if you're interested on what I'm saying here, this is actually going to be a paraphrase of the intro to the book. So there's a lot more information when I present this harmony of these documents to paint a picture of the Roosevelt Christmas. But I want to get since right now we're talking about Christmas, it's time to get a little festive in here. All right. So now It is Christmas morning. The clock strikes 7. There are children running through the halls of Sagamore Hill. There is so much excitement. But outside, the snow is falling gently and the waves are lapping up against the shores of Oyster Bay. Inside, so much excitement amongst the children, but not just the children. Theodore Roosevelt has been up for a while because he perhaps is even more excited than the children for Christmas. He describes it as a time of just delirious joy. So he's up stoking the fire. The children burst into the room. The stockings there are in Edith and Roosevelt's room by the mantel and hanging off the bedpost. Roosevelt might scoop up one of his younger children, whether it be Quentin or Archie. He is so thankful for his family, and I'm sure Christmas was a time, when they're all together to really step back and be thankful. He actually wrote to one of his sons later on in life. He says, "I have heartily enjoyed many things: the presidency, my success as a soldier, a rider, a big game hunter, an explorer. But all of them put together are not for one moment to be weighed in the balance compared with the joy I have known with your mother and all of you." He also writes about Edith in one of his Christmas letters. "Edith grows steadily stronger and better, and she is just as pretty and as charming as she can be." So after the Roosevelt children dig into their stockings, which, by the way, Roosevelt describes as bulging with treasures, he also describes his children's chubby little hands, and he and his wife refer to their children as their bunnies. So there's the bunnies scamper around with their chubby little hands and dig into their stockings. After that, they head down for breakfast. And Roosevelt loved coffee. He also loved tea. He liked typical breakfast foods we might think of, like bacon and sausage and eggs and hominy and toasted jam. But it's Christmas, so they might have something a little extra special. After breakfast, it's time to go into the parlor. And this is where the big gifts are. We typically put our Christmas presents under the tree, but the Roosevelts, they had a table set up for each child, and on the table were the presents. This is what our President Roosevelt did with his family when he was a child as well. Now, when Roosevelt was a child, he would get things that were largely practical and sophisticated for Christmas. He would get things like a compass, or a thermometer, or a water flask, or boots, or a hat, or pieces of art and photographs. But for his children, Roosevelt just wants to spoil them with the joys of childhood. So there are lots of toys. Roosevelt believes that it is the child's job and work to play. And so the children, they get things like dolls and toy soldiers and toy horses. And there's an account of Roosevelt and Edith giving their children a playset of Noah's Ark and a Buffalo Bill. And Roosevelt says that his children came just as close as they can get to paradise on this earth on Christmas morning. After presents, they would go into the library. Perhaps they'd sprawl out on one of the animal skin rugs from one of Roosevelt's adventure or hunting expeditions, and they would play with their toys there in the library. And Roosevelt was often roped into playing with his kids, which I think would be such an incredible sight to see our President Roosevelt playing with his children with toys. I'm sure there was a lot of imagination and creativity there. But after a while being in the library, Roosevelt wanted some more party recreations. So he would get the family together, and they would perhaps play stickball, or, if weather permitting, like tennis. They would go for horseback rides or a sleigh ride or play out in the snow. But as we read of many of these letters, there's always this time of recreation there in the afternoon after the presents. And then back to the house. They would come for what Roosevelt describes as the usual Christmas dinner. And they would invite over friends and family, and sometimes people there at Oyster Bay that just simply did not have anywhere else to go. And they would have their big meal, and numerous times it's documented that they would finish off the evening beginning with dancing. And particularly, they would dance to the Virginia Reel. And so that is kind of like a picture of how a Roosevelt Christmas Day would go down. There's also another really important aspect of Roosevelt Christmas, and that is the aspect of charity or service. So Theodore Roosevelt Sr., the father of our president, he would annually volunteer at the Newsboys Lodge Christmas dinner there in New York. And our Roosevelt and his brother Elliot, when they were young men, they would do the same. But as a father, and there in Oyster Bay at Sagamore Hill, Roosevelt would volunteer at the local school there and pass out gifts to the children. Now, depending on the sources you read, there's some different accounts of how this exactly went down. Some said that he would dress up as St. Nicholas to pass out the gifts. Others say he dressed up in his Rough Rider uniform to pass out gifts. I would think probably the latter makes more sense, but perhaps there were different holidays and he did both of these things. There's also, he refers to in one of his letters of giving his usual sermonette, is what he called it. He would pass out the gifts and give a sermonette. And he said it was mercifully brief. Now, Roosevelt mercifully brief. So when I read this letter, and this kind of dawned on me later, like when I was rereading my book, I was like, I think he's being funny here. I don't think he really gave a brief sermonette. I think he's just kind of poking fun that he probably talked too long. I don't know. But yes, that aspect of service and charity. Yeah, but his sermonette, I was going to mention, some say that he would speak on the true meaning of Christmas, of Christ Jesus' birth. Others say he didn't talk about Christmas at all, that he rather preached the strenuous life. Again, perhaps different holidays, he did both of these things. But I think it's enough of me just talking about Theodore Roosevelt and the holidays. I want us to hear from Roosevelt's own words. So I want to take a look at a letter here. And as we read these letters, pay attention to some of these lively descriptions that he uses. Actually, I want to ask you guys, before we read the letter, can we throw out some adjectives, just some words, one or two words that we would use to describe Christmas? I mean, of course, there's the obvious. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. What are some other words we can use? What's that? Go ahead. Joyful.
Magical.
Did you say magical?
Magical.
Yeah. Festive. Sacred. Secret.
Sacred.
Oh, sacred. Yes, very good. Well, here's some Roosevelt descriptions of Christmas. Of course, there's, the usual delightful, right? Then we have a time of wild excitement, a time of delirious joy, a time of wild rapture, lovely, enchanting, ideal. So as we take a look at some letters, pay attention to some of these lively descriptions. I think they're very entertaining. Now, this first letter that I want to present to you, this was written in December 26, 1890, so right after Christmas. Roosevelt is living in Washington, D.C., but he's not president yet. He's just at a temporary residence there, and he is writing to his sister, Bandlands. Now, you'll see that he addresses his sister as Darling Vi. So supposedly, Bambi would come and go so fast. He would, hi Bambi, bye Bambi, and she was here and there and never. So eventually, she just assumed the nickname Vi. And I, sure wish Roosevelt was here so we could actually hear this in his own words. I wonder what that would sound like.
Darling Vi, a very Merry Christmas to you, and may you spend the next with us without fail. We long for you, and we think it will be very pleasant when we are having all Christmases at Sagamore Hill. But we hold a lovely time here, and the children enjoy it with all the same wild rapture that we felt just 25 years ago. And I think I enjoyed it almost as much as the children. Even Kermit really liked the stockings and toys, although in abject terror of the menagerie of squeaky, woolly animals which covered his table. Soon after 7, Alice and Ted fairly galloped into our room to look at their stockings, bulging outlines with promise of what was inside. They burrowed into them with their eager, chubby little hands and hailed each new treasure trove with shouts of delight. Then, after breakfast, we walked into the room where the big toys were. So many of them were on their tables, and I suppose that Alice and Ted came as near to realizing the feelings of those who enter paradise as they ever will on this earth. They worshipped all the wonderful things, and soon the trains of cars were loaded with lurid, imaginative beasts of Noah's Ark, while Buffalo Bill and his Indians walked in wonderful processions with the soldiers and the cows. And my jaded mind had to find names for each of the new skin horses. By the way, one of their games was to lasso, throw, and brand each of those new skin horses. My silver shaving brush was exactly as I wished. It was so good of you to think it and give it to me. Give my love to Bob. I am going to write him at once. Your loving, affectionate brother, Theodore.
Thank you. You know, we can't talk about Theodore Roosevelt and Christmas without mentioning the Christmas tree, because there's a lot of stories going around about this. The Roosevelts did not have a Christmas tree in the White House. Now, they did have a Christmas tree at Sacramento, but later in the White House, no Christmas tree. Some say it's because he was such a conservationist, he did not want to cut down any trees or promote that tradition. We don't really have any documentation on this, but here's a few things that were going on at the time that can help you kind of draw your own conclusion about the matter. So the Christmas tree tradition was not fully established in a regular custom in the United States until the 1920s. So Roosevelt being in the White House earlier on in the century, it wasn't as expected as it is now. In the years just prior to him coming into office, the Forest Reserve Act and the Forest Management Act were passed. So a lot of people were talking about trees and preserving them. So that was a thing that was going on. McKinley, his predecessor in office, had received many letters of people asking him to discourage the practice of having Christmas trees. We know that, of course, Roosevelt was against destructive lumbering, but again, we don't know if he was against Christmas trees. There was an article in the Ladies' Home Journal by a journalist, Lincoln O'Brien, and Roosevelt actually praised this man as always telling the truth. He talked about how the Roosevelt home was crowded. All the children, not a lot of space for the Christmas tree. We can kind of gather that it was just a personal preference not to have a tree in the White House for Christmas. But although Roosevelt and his wife decided not to have a Christmas tree, somehow, for a few years, Christmas trees did appear in the White House. And the one who is responsible for this is none other than Roosevelt's son, Archie. Well, I could tell you the story, but we have Archie here with us. So Archie is going to tell us about Christmas trees in the White House.
Yes, on one occasion, me and a carpenter who usually worked around the White House snuck a Christmas tree into the White House. We hid it in the closet and decorated it with gifts and other ornaments. On Christmas morning, I was so excited. I came pounding on the door of my mother and father's room. We ate breakfast, and then just as we were about to go and open the big presents, I said I had a gift for everybody. In the closet was my little Christmas tree. Father was very happy, and each kid got a little present, even some of our pets. Algonquin, Jack, Tom, everyone was happy.
Thank you. Now, I want us to get nostalgic for a moment and think about our childhoods and some of the gifts we received at Christmas. What is something that really stuck out? We're excited to receive as a gift for Christmas. I know for myself, when I was about 5, I received this electric Thomas the Train playset, and I was so excited I was jumping up and down that I accidentally ran into a wall and then fell over and started crying. We have it all on video, but what is something that you got for Christmas as a child?
I would say a very delightful book.
Oh, book. Excellent.
BB gun.
A baseball.
Or BB gun.
BB gun.
A doll.
Doll. Yes.
A
A bag.
Oh, banjo.
Yes, well, I want us to take a look at what Roosevelt got for a child at Christmas. So we're going to take a look at one of his diary entries. So 12-year-old Roosevelt, this is 1869. He says, Christmas, Christmas, hip hip hurrah. I awake at 4, and we 4 children went into Mama's and Papa's bed. I caught everybody and sang Merry Christmas. We then opened our stockings. They were nice and bulky. I had 2 oranges and 5 kinds of candy in mine. I had a compass, thermometer, 12 photographs, a cardinal's cap, a pair of gloves, and a beautiful cravat. A gourd for a water glass, a little lovely box with an amber cover, and an ivory chalice. Then Papa and Mama came in. We had prayers, and then we had breakfast. We then went into the parlor to our tables. The presents passed our utmost expectations. I had a beautiful hunt with all kinds of things in it. I received 2 lamps and an inkstand in the ancient Pompeian style, and a silver saber, slippers, a gold helmet, and a cannon besides the ivory chalice. I had beautiful writing paper, a candlestick of the antique style, a mosaic 1,500 years old, 3 books, 2 watch cases, 9 big photographs, an ornament, and a pair of studs. Then we went to St. Peter's to see the Pope. They go to see the Pope because on this holiday, or this Christmas, they are on vacation in Rome. This is a letter. This is a letter that he writes his child and nanny, Medora. And this, in this letter, we see how Roosevelt kind of inherited his sense of adventure from his family, because this is not your typical Christmas or vacation. Dear Dora and Tom, now keep in mind, this is 12-year-old Roosevelt. We spent our Christmas in Rome. We hung up our stockings and came in the bed of Mama. We had a great many presents, and Aunt Annie sent some money way over the water to buy me a present. She bought 2 lamps and an inkstand. I got a hunt and some books and ornaments for Margaret. We had a donkey ride today, but I did not enjoy it much. At Sorrento, we had a splendid one. We all 3 started out on big donkeys. They galloped along and they jogged so nearly as to jolt our dinners out of us. We went up a hill so steep that we almost fell off, and we went in a gully so narrow as to scrape our fingers and feet. In my donkey brayed, trembling loudly. We saw some runaway horses, a great many of the carriages of Torrentini, which have 3 horses abreast in them. We made the ascent of Mount Vesuvius. We went on carriages for a long while and then got on ponies. Papa, Mr. Stevens, a strange gentleman, and we 2 boys galloped ahead, but after a while we left him behind and galloped ahead alone. At last, Ellie and I got alone. At the foot, a guide took me and other guides took the rest, and we began to ascend. It was all covered with snow, and it was very hard to go up it, and it was very cold. At the top, it was quite warm, but my alpine stick fell down into one of the craters and caught on fire. I have it yet. We had some lunch and boiled some eggs there. We then began coming down on the other side in dirt up to our knees. It tried Mama very much, and she had to stop a great deal. We then took our ponies over a miserable road, which I could hardly walk, much less the ponies. We rode back to the hotel. Yesterday, we saw another little volcano. The ground around it is hollow, and when I strike it with a stone, it makes a hollow noise. We saw the prisons of Nero. We had to have torches. They're the most dreary, damp, and uncomfortable things you could imagine. Raised stone for a pillow and the ground for a bed was the furniture. Bye-bye. You're loving Theodore Roosevelt. So I could go on and on. There are letters that go up, like I said, from his childhood all the way up until a week before his death. So if you are interested in more of this book, I will be selling copies back there along with a few of my other works. I have some books about my travels in the national park and also a reprint of Roosevelt, two of his works in one, Realizable Ideals and The Key to Success in Life. And there's an intro to this book that I wrote. So I'll have those back there in a moment. But I think right now I would like to stop and take some questions. We have a lot of Roosevelt experts here in the audience, so if I don't have the answer, I may deflect on some of them. Yes?
I was just wondering, at Christmas time, I have the recipe for stand tarts that Edith always served. And so I'm wondering, do you have like recipes in the book?
I don't, but that would be awesome. I did not come across much pertaining to food in my own research.
And she makes stand tarts and the recipes.
That is fascinating. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. So, and, as I learn more, I entertain. Maybe I need to have like the second edition where I bring more things that I find talking with people like these. Thank you.
Joshua, your book doesn't, I believe, address Easter, which for us on our calendars kind of the other big holiday in the spring. So you got anything on Easter, or maybe that's another book, or something. And then related to what is in your book, we know that on two Thanksgivings and the tradition of Boxing Day, those were done sometimes down in Pine Knot. And I just wonder if you could just touch on those two questions.
So Easter, I actually don't have anything about Easter in the book, and it's something that I've entertained for many years. What is not for the Roosevelts during Easter? So I don't have information on the Roosevelts Easter, but that is something that
I really don't either, so I'm waiting for your next one.
And as well as Pine Knot, I actually have been learning more about that being here in Medora from some of the things you said and talking to other people. So it's not everything, it's just, Sagamore Hill and White House Christmas, but yeah, there's the Pine Knot Christmases to be explored as well.
In Oyster Bay, do you get any of that tradition of Boxing Day? And I'm a kid where I didn't grow up with the concept of Boxing Day. But the day after Christmas, and it's kind of an English thing.
Yeah.
And the idea of taking leftovers and gifts to the poor, the charity, but also to friends and servants. And it wasn't at a time when a household like that ran with half a dozen or more servants.
So perhaps that had an influence on, Roosevelt going to the school there and handing out gifts, and also the employees, perhaps.
Does anybody celebrate Boxing Day anyway in this room? Everybody's so happy.
Yeah.
I just lived in England every year.
Is it still alive?
Oh, yes.
What does one do on Boxing Day?
Well, I think the proper people who are aware of that history do that. They take things to the poor in boxes. But I have to say, you just educated me. So I lived in England for 13 years, and I've never heard that story, so thank you very much. But that would have been a wonderful tradition, and I would imagine that TR would have done that if he was aware of that.
I mentioned with Joshua, Elizabeth mentioned the safety issue with putting candles on Christmas trees. We also kind of discussed, it does have a kind of a Germanic Tannenbaum kind of thing. And if TR is such a proud American, he was also a bit of an Anglophile. Look at the special relationship that we say that occurred between the United States and England. And the Germans, TR never really kind of connected and resonated with the Germans. I think he always kind of saw it as being that eventual foe that it would be. But I think that might have been a little bit of his not a big fan of the Christmas tree. What about in that, what we might think is legendary or apocryphal relationship between the Roosevelts and the Christmas tree? It is said that Gifford and Show encouraged it because you could thin out the pine forest by taking the smaller trees.
Yeah. And
It's almost kind of like a pro-conservation rejoinder to the idea of it not being healthy. It's actually healthy for the forest.
yeah, there was full, at that time, there was full camps, like, don't touch it all, or like, we need to clean out the lower parts of the forest. So in conservationists, we're preaching that, you know, on both sides, both messages.
And now, of course, modern tree farm is an entirely different.
Yes. Yeah, but they believe, some people believe, like, yes, we can do Christmas trees responsibly.